So even though they gave me my channel back after fighting with them for 5 years, they're still hitting me every day with copyright strikes, takedown notices, and age restrictions. In this one particular video, I can't let this go age restricted, so I'm going to post it on Rumble because it will stay there. I'll also post it on BitChute, but people in the UK can't see it. But I'll also post it on Odyssey. How about that? And Richie from Boston TV, because this is important. All right, this is what got the ball rolling. The entire world was, the United States was completely, well, you know what? The entire world was different before this thing happened. So this is important. Download this, save it, share it everywhere. At any rate, here we go.
Another plane just hit. Right? Oh my God! Another plane has just hit. It hit another building.
Yeah, I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
The whole side has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed.
The building has collapsed.
And there, as you can see, perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsed.
There is nothing left of United Airlines Flight 93. The plane made a nosedive right into the ground, and all that's left is a crater 8 feet deep and 15 feet wide.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, and we will be, and we will be.
Get ready to read all these words on this page without making a mistake. Look at the letter at the end and remember the sound it makes. Get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready to read this word the fast way. Get ready. Kid. Yes, kid. Sound it out. Get ready. Kid. Sound it out. Get ready. Kid. What word? Kid. Yes, kid. Boys and girls, sound this word out. Get ready. Seal. What word? Seal. Yes, steel. Read these words the fast way. Get ready. Plane. Yes, plane. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Let's read these words the fast way without making a mistake. Get ready. Kite. Yes, kite. Get ready. Kit. Yes, kit. Get ready. Steel. Yes, steel. Get ready. Plane. Yes, plane. Get ready. Must. Yes, must. Boys and girls, pick your reader up from under your seat. Open your book up to lesson 60 on page 153.
So for those that don't understand what you just saw, kite, plane, must hit, steel, that was a black magic invocation using the children, the most innocent, to help make sure that this entire thing went forward smoothly. That's what you just saw. But you probably already know that, but whatever.
New world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be. And we will be.
Another plane just hit. Right? Oh my God! Another plane has just hit. It hit another building.
And we will be.
I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
And we will be.
The whole side has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed.
The building has collapsed.
And we will be.
The building has collapsed.
And there, as you can see, perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsed.
And we will be.
There's nothing left of United Airlines Flight 93. The plane made a nosedive right into the ground, and all that's left is a crater 8 feet deep and 15 feet wide.
What happened? It was an explosion.
third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like?
Horrible. It's like hell. You don't want to know. The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the...
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. But we was inside waiting to go upstairs. And on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. And we just collapsed and everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down,
Second it was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one. Yes. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, and then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And then it exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
And we will be.
AM after that,
Just man, everybody tried to make their way out.
just trying to help all the brothers get out.
A lot of people trapped inside.
We're sitting in the Brooklyn Navy on We watched the first explosion as we watched the building. So black as a very large airplane fly right into the second building. It came out of the south. Right in front of our eyes. Just
All I know is these three
it was so surreal, like a movie set. Second and third explosion. We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. I was on this drive here for the other one.
People don't understand. There may be more. Any one of these fucking buildings could blow up. This ain't done yet.
This is on top of this. This could be no worse than this. Could be nothing no more than this. You're in the building trying to help people. And it exploded inside.
A lot of people ask, how could they have gotten all the explosions and all the explosives in the building? Well, many of you may, but many of you may not know whatsoever at all that before all this occurred, there was the largest elevator renovation job in the world going on at the Twin Towers, and it was done by a company called Ace Elevators, who, just like many other places that were involved in this, closed down after 9/11. There's a lot of good information on Ace Elevator Company and all the questions and research. Many real people that are researching this, pilots, engineers, police officers, military, etc., think that this is the smoking gun that could get the whole thing opened up again. But that ain't never going to happen. They already took all the material or the crime scene, the steel that was blown up with thermite and whatever else, it was all shipped off to China. It's gone.
Successful. And we will be.
This ain't done yet.
Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Richie from Boston. It is the 11th of September, 2019. And I'm going to show you some information that I found on a channel that I've been subscribed to for a long time. And he's been taken down numerous times because this kid or person or computer or whatever has been exposing anomalies and wildfires, 9/11, all sorts of staged and false events. Do you see what I'm saying? His YouTube channel is Mental Boost. I don't know if that's him or a barbarian. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But he has been absolutely and entirely relentless. World Trade Center, 9/11, 9/11, 9/11, World Trade Center. Do you see what's going on here? 9/11, the wildfires. He's picked up and seems to study anomalies that are things that most people don't catch. Do you see what I'm saying? So I asked his permission. I'm going to mirror this video. It's probably going to get the channel a strike or taken down or a guideline strike or demonetized or whatever. I don't know. We'll see. Whatever. At any rate, like, share, and subscribe, or don't, but subscribe to his channel because he has a lot of seriously good information. And I am out safe in a twinkling of an eye. We didn't see 9/11 coming the first time at all. And it happened about this time of the day. Crazy. 18 years. And still no truth. And there never will be. I saw people in a live stream or a premiered video I put up last night, and they were talking about there's new evidence. They're going to reopen the investigation. Dude, think about JFK. That whole story stinks to high heaven. They'll just drag it out. All the steel was shipped away. All the evidence. The people that would investigate this are the people that got promoted to the positions where they could actually investigate something like this. So they're never going to investigate something like this. Understand that. Or don't. I'm out. So how prolific was that? That was 6 years ago, and I'm recording this video because the channel I said it's probably going to get taken down was taken down because of this video. And I have to save this video before it's completely gone or the channel's gone. Because I've had my channel back for 2 days and they're already hitting me left, right, and center. But what I said about JFK, isn't that strange? Because Trump said, we're going to open the files. And I told you when Trump said that there would be nothing but redacted. It would never be figured out, anything to that effect. And then here we are, at any rate.
So you see, we know where those spheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips. As if we didn't know where these spheres came from. They're actually found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips. It's very clear, like you see here and here. And they find the same curious red-gray chips in all of these samples. Red on one side, gray on the other. They look like paint chips, don't they? They get even more curious, zoom in with an electron microscope and find particles, rhomboidal-shaped cubed particles of iron oxide and aluminum platelets, but so small, they're 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. And they're set in this organic bed of oxygen, silica, carbon, which is important because that's organic material, which in TNT explosives is responsible for the rapid gas expansion, which pushes things over.
And in terms of the nanothermite, the traces of which you did find, what are the possible explanations for its presence in the World Trade Center? I mean, could it have been in the aeroplanes? Could it have been a naturally occurring substance in any way?
Well, the two last questions or options I can definitely rule out. It cannot come from the aeroplanes, and well, if it's been there on beforehand, those who put it there, I urge them to step forward and tell us how and why it got there. Mentioned frequently in the discussion following our publication is that this could be the primer paint which was applied to the steel beams in order to prevent corrosion.
And in terms of the nanothermite, the traces of which you did find, what are the possible explanations for its presence in the World Trade Center? I mean, could it have been in the aeroplanes? Could it have been a naturally occurring substance in any way?
What we characterize as unreacted thermitic material in the shape of some very tiny red-gray chips, which have different properties. Most importantly is they're still reacting.
Could it have been a naturally occurring substance in any way?
100 tons. So many tons.
We're not just talking about nanothermite, in fact, we're talking about both nanothermite and conventional explosives used in large quantities.
Yeah, but we have not found remains or traces of conventional explosives. Actually, we have suggested and recommended to NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that they should look for remains or traces of explosives, and they have refused to do so every time. They have not investigated it. We have not found remains or traces of conventional explosives. Actually, we have suggested and recommended to NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Spherically shaped emission, and these are clear, corroborative, experimentally reproducible evidence that could be taken to a court of law
by using the scientific method, examining the evidence from the World Trade Center and developing unbiased conclusions from unbiased experts in their fields. More than 25,000 years of experience. Hi, I'm Richard Gage.
Thank you for caring about the truth of 9/11. Thank you very much.
When we are successful, and we will be.
My name is Jeanette McKinley. I was a resident of Lower Manhattan, living directly across the street from the World Trade Center on September 11th. emails. I was sitting at my computer. Boom. I could immediately see the flames. I was close enough that I could literally just turn my head, and there it was with the building burning. I was with my friend 𝗦𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗹. We watched everything out the window. He was fixated taking photographs, and whenever I mentioned leaving, he never wanted to leave. He said to me, "This is history. Don't you realize we are watching history happen? We're part of history. Why would we leave?" I was in the kitchen. I was in my kitchen. I had flowers in my hand, and the building starts coming down. Our windows blew in. He came running across the apartment. "Get out of here. The building is coming down." Well, it sounded like it was coming down on us. That cloud, there was a debris cloud created by when the Tower 2 fell. It just created a debris cloud, which became part of our life because it just burst in our window at 50 miles an hour. That whole cloud just came bursting in, and many people were wanting to investigate whether the collapses were actually controlled demolitions, as many people thought on the very day. Even the news commentators thought they were controlled demolitions. So there was a lot of controversy about whether they were or not. And friends of mine that knew that I had the dust were also knew a scientist, Stephen Jones, at BYU.
My name is Dr. Stephen Jones. I have a PhD in physics from Vanderbilt University, 1978. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from Brigham Young University, 1973. I graduated magna cum laude. I went after PhD work. I did postdoctoral work at Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility. In June 2007, I was examining a dust sample, which I'd obtained from 𝗦𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗹. I was using a loupe and also just looking at it with my eyes and an ordinary optical microscope, although stereo, so that I could see better in 3 dimensions. And what I found was a chip that looked like it might be a paint chip. I mean, early on I was thinking maybe not too interesting, but this chip was rather striking in its appearance. It had an orange-red color, first of all, and then I found several of these, and they all had some gray material adhering to the side of the red material. So layered. Later we found multiple layers, but most of these chips have 2 layers, red, gray. I did take one of these chips then to the electron microscope, the scanning electron microscope, and we looked at it with the electron microscope, and then we used a system where we could determine the elements. What we found in the red material is a combination of aluminum and iron oxide, and these are the components of thermite. Of course, now we looked with an electron microscope, we looked deeper and deeper, higher and higher magnification. And I pulled in a colleague of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Ferrer. He's an expert on the electron microscope machine. So he actually broke a piece off of one of these red chips, and then later he did 4 different samples, broke a piece off. That gives you a fresh surface. Because in the dust, there's all sorts of stuff. There's zinc and titanium and calcium, all sorts of stuff. So he broke off a tip, you see, so we could look at a fresh surface. And then what you see in all 4 samples that we studied in this detail: carbon, which is significant, oxygen, iron, and aluminum. We looked at this, and these again are the ingredients, except for the carbon, and we found that experimenters working with super thermite, trying to beef it up, make it more explosive, tailoring it to different weapons applications, they would have silicon in there and an organic material, which means a carbon. So a polymer such as 𝗦𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗹, they would add to this to give it the properties they wanted. So that fit. Now, see, that was surprising to me to see silicon and carbon, but then we find in the literature that's what these guys are doing in the weapons labs, Livermore and Los Alamos. They're adding organic, because that gives you a gas production. When the thermite goes off, now you also have gas production, which gives you the explosive force, for instance. I suggested that we take a sample of this red-gray chip material and run it through a very sensitive instrument called a differential scanning calorimeter. And he did that. What it does, you heat the temperature slowly, and the material will react if it's going to. And if it reacts and produces heat, you'll get a spike in your calorimeter. And then if it reacts quickly, it'll be a narrow spike. If it, say, burns over a long period of time, you'll see a big broad spike. And the total area there is the total amount of energy released. And it gives you a lot of information.
When we are successful, and we will be.
The total area there is the total amount of energy released. And it gives you a lot of information.
The whole site has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
You can see perhaps the second tower, the front tower, the top portion of which is collapsed.
What we found, what Dr. 𝗦𝗵𝗿 found first, and he was real excited when he told me about this, he took one of these chips and he put it in the differential scanning calorimeter, and sure enough, it went off at right about 430 centigrade, but more importantly, the peak was high, which means a lot of energy released, and narrow, which means, in his terms, it blew up. You know, he said, man, this is it. This stuff blows up. It behaves just like it has the ingredients of nanothermite. He said, well, there should be, in a thermite reaction, you should produce molten iron. So you should see some spheres of iron. Think of spraying water in the air, and you get droplets that are more or less spherical because the surface tension pulls the liquid into a sphere. It's very simple. Same thing with molten iron from the thermitic reaction, whether it's ordinary conventional thermite or the super nanothermite. Either way, you get this molten iron, and you should get these droplets of iron. So we said, we got to look for those. You know, if you don't find those, maybe who knows what it is. But we got to find droplets of molten iron. Otherwise, we're not sure we had the thermite reaction, the thermitic reaction. In this case, it's a nanothermite. So we looked, and wow, what a beautiful sight. As you look at this, after the red materials reacted, there are these little spheres, just tons of them. We compared the traces that we got in this sophisticated calorimeter with traces obtained with known thermite. These are published data, and our peak is actually narrower. I mean, this stuff goes off with very rapidly.
It's been 10 years since 9/11 happened, and we are left with hundreds, if not thousands, of unanswered questions about the 9/11 attacks. A transparently fraudulent 9/11 Commission report, which purposely failed to even mention the collapse of World Trade Center 7, and a host of ridiculous so-called debunking websites, forums, and other literature, which have done absolutely nothing over the past 10 years to debunk anything other than cleverly selected strawman arguments, and have failed to stem the constant flow of new 9/11 information, which researchers have been uncovering and bringing out to the public. Instead, they continue to label truth seekers, including family members of people who died on 9/11, as conspiracy theorists, and devise clever propaganda designed to prevent the general public from looking any further into the evidence or the actual claims of the so-called conspiracy theorists. In this video, we will take a deeper look into the so-called investigations, which have provided us with the official story, and why they deserve a more thorough examination. The Bush administration initially delayed a 9/11 investigation for 13. A week after 9/11, letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to several news media offices and 2 senators who were perhaps a bit too vocal about opening an official investigation into 9/11. The anthrax used in the attacks was identified as an Ames strain, which means it had to have come from the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases at Fort Detrick, Maryland. A member of that institute, 𝗦𝗵𝗿𝗶𝗹, managed the National Institute of Health response to the anthrax attacks. Coincidentally, 𝗻𝗿 also warned the White House to start taking Cipro, an antibiotic which is effective against anthrax, a week before the attacks. 𝗻𝗵𝗿𝗶 also happened to be a managing director at Kroll Associates, which ran security at the World Trade Center up until the weekend before 9/11, when that role was personally handed off by 𝗻𝗿 to FBI agent John O'Neill, who would later die in the attacks, drawing strong suspicion that he was set up due to his knowledge of al-Qaeda and the 9/11 hijackers, whom he was blocked from investigating while he was working at the FBI. In January 2002, President Bush personally asked Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle to limit the congressional investigation into the events of September 11th. The Bush administration only formed the 9/11 Commission after being prodded by the victims' families, who lobbied Congress for over a year to open the investigations. When the Bush administration finally did open a 9/11 investigation, it was described by some members as set up to fail.
The president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
If you're one of those four that gets to see these documents, would that change your opinion?
No. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting.
They even attempted to appoint Henry Kissinger, a known cover-up mastermind, as head commissioner. He resigned after victims' family members asked him sensitive questions about his connections to the bin Laden family and the Carlyle Group. Philip Zelikow wrote the conclusions for the report before the investigation ever began, and even then, any areas which did not support the official story were neither mentioned nor investigated by the 9/11 Commission. 6 out of 10 members of that commission have discussed on record how the government lied about the official story, and 70% of the questions posed by the victims' families were never answered or officially investigated. Instead of answers, we've witnessed a barrage of accusations, which have taken anyone who asks questions about 9/11, including over 1,500 professional architects and engineers, as well as family members of people who were murdered that day, and labels them as conspiracy theorists. Instead of detailed investigations which leave no stone unturned, we have instead gotten popular mechanics and a barrage of so-called debunking media and literature, including a 10,000-page overly complicated and redundant scientific report by the National Institute of Standards and Technology based solely on unreleased and never peer-reviewed computer models, as opposed to actual physical data, debris, and evidence. It's important to look at what happened to the evidence from 9/11. The day of 9/11, most of the FBI was in Monterey, California on an agency retreat. This was essential for keeping the more experienced and honest members of the agency as far away from the crime scene as possible, while other agency insiders could be assigned to the investigations before their counterparts returned. Federal authorities such as FEMA and the CIA took immediate control over the crime scene and began whisking away evidence that very same night. Turner Construction, one of the primary contractors at Ground Zero, occupied the 38th floor of the North Tower and was involved in performing the fireproofing upgrades inside the towers. It has been noted that these upgrades were completed in the 3 years before 9/11 on floors that match up almost identically to the floors of impact and failure on 9/11. Once the cleanup was fully coordinated, the operations were consolidated under the control of 2 primary contractors, AMEC Construction Management and Bovis Lend-Lease. These are the 2 companies that were originally assigned to the areas of Ground Zero that included the North Tower, AMEC, and the South Tower, Bovis. A truly surprising fact is that at the time of the attacks on 9/11, AMEC had just completed a $258 million refurbishment of Wedge 1 of the Pentagon, which is exactly where American Airlines Flight 77 impacted that building. Arguments over the size of the hole of the Pentagon and whether it was a plane or a missile are, in my opinion, a convenient distraction from the much bigger picture of why that section of the building was targeted and by whom. On September 10, 2001, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion in unadjusted funds were missing from the Pentagon budget. The very next day, the offices whose responsibility it was for tracking that money down were destroyed when American Airlines Flight 77 impacted that very section of the building. The only off-site backup for the Pentagon's black budget financial records was a secure federal office building in the World Trade Center complex. Strangely, it too was destroyed on 9/11. World Trade Center 7 was the largest CIA headquarters outside of Langley, Virginia, and housed offices involved in several large-scale federal investigations into massive stock market and accounting fraud. Not surprisingly, World Trade Center 7 was the first to be cleaned up and the evidence destroyed at Ground Zero. So it appears that not only was there a cover-up after 9/11 to control the crime scene, destroy the evidence, and hide the truth about what really happened that day, but there were also cover-ups of earlier crimes which took place on the day of 9/11. It also appears that there were quite a few people who were killed in the 9/11 attacks themselves in order to prevent them from speaking out after the attacks. FBI agent John O'Neill, of course, but also several of the names of people aboard Flight 77 into the Pentagon who had top-secret clearances and apparently knew too much. The Twin Towers were also full of a shady host of characters with connections to military-industrial contractors, petroleum interests, the Department of Energy, financial institutions, intelligence agencies, and coincidentally, of course, the Bush crime family. These people obviously do not want to be investigated, and would much rather have people waste their time arguing over pointless 9/11 anomalies like airplane crashes and controlled demolitions. They absolutely don't want people to follow the money or to start fingering suspects and naming names and connections. There's already a host of disinformation agents out there pointing researchers in the wrong directions. So here we are 10 years later, no legitimate investigation, multiplying layers of disinformation and various conspiracy theories, and the so-called 9/11 debunkers who consistently misrepresent the evidence brought forth by serious investigators. Here's Jim Meigs of Popular Mechanics promoting his new book on Fox News.
How many times did we hear that Building 7 was professionally demolished?
And that was a tough one because because that building was not hit by a plane. In the end, it was proven that it was the result of prolonged fires that weakened the internal structure of the building.
And of course, Rosie O'Donnell famously said, with that, it's the first time in history that fire melted steel.
Appendix C of the FEMA report shows one of the only studied pieces of World Trade Center 7 steel and clearly indicates sulfide eutectic formation and intergranular melting, which could not have possibly occurred in a fire. And no experiments have ever been performed which show that it is possible to melt and sulfidate steel in this manner, using fires and drywall gypsum, which contains small amounts of sulfur. Listen as Jim Meigs uses this same fallacious sidestep tactic, which can be found on numerous debunking websites, as well as Michael Shermer's article from Scientific American, all of which completely avoid the evidence that steel actually melted at the World Trade Center, and instead claim that the steel didn't need to melt for the building to collapse and the official story to be true.
A lot of people had a hard time understanding how buildings could fall down as a result of fire, but what we found is it doesn't take temperatures high enough to melt steel. It just has to heat up the steel so it expands and then softens and weakens the structure until it collapses.
Okay.
That may be true, but you still didn't explain how the World Trade Center 7 steel from Appendix C of the FEMA report was melted with holes through it like Swiss cheese, for God's sake.
And one of the new things in this particular update that you've got is there are some guys who claim to have collected some air samples, and in that air sample was what?
Some dust. They call it nanothermite. Now, thermite is a compound that if you apply it in a certain way, it can actually melt metal in certain conditions. And they're claiming they've given up on the idea there were bombs in the building. That was the original claim. Now they're saying, oh, there was some kind of nanothermite. And of course, you talk to demolition experts, the whole idea is ridiculous.
Interesting. Popular Mechanics is now claiming that it is ridiculous to think that thermite could be used to demolish a steel structure. Yet in the November 1935 issue of Popular Mechanics, it describes how the Skyride Tower in Chicago was demolished in that very same manner, by engineers using thermite to melt through the vertical steel columns and collapse the structure. Pretty ridiculous, eh?
But what it shows is how the conspiracy theories keep evolving as one gets knocked down. They never change their conclusions. They just come up with new evidence.
That's probably because there's so much evidence, which we will continue to compile and make public until the truth is known and the perpetrators are brought to justice.
Now they're literally claiming their best evidence is grains of dust found in the street near the ground.
As if the size of the evidence has anything to do with how important it is. DNA is even smaller than the nanothermite particles which can be found uniformly throughout samples of World Trade Center dust. Yet DNA is used routinely to convict criminals in court cases all over the world. Just like the nanothermite evidence from the World Trade Center dust will someday convict the 9/11 criminals.
So what you just saw was a brief synopsis of everything. They completely and totally painted the buildings up with thermite, special thermite made at Los Alamos and blew the places down. And the fun thing about this is Alien Scientist was one of the guys in this video, and he's given up on this, which bums me out, but it is what it is. This is how they got the ball rolling. If you weren't alive in 2001, it was a completely different world, especially a completely different country. But share this, because this is important, and it'll never be revealed, but people just need to know. And if they don't have the time, they don't have the attention span, they can listen to this.
Of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These overpowering the directed of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001. Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes. Osama bin Laden. The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping. NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her, and her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in 𝗦𝗵𝗿𝗶 for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack Special Forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. This is the story of 9/11, brought to you by the media which told you the hard truths about
his head could be seen to move violently forward.
And
they took the babies out of the incubators.
And
mobile production facilities.
And
the rescue of Jessica Lynch.
If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit, paranoid, tinfoil, dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone. Ever. This has been a public service announcement by the Friends of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DIA, SEC, MSM, White House, NIST, and the 9/11 Commission.